we called this session data protection life hack. So I think maybe it's worth saying what is a life hack. So I'll give you a dictionary definition of it. A life hack is a clever or simple trick, shortcut or method that aims to improve efficiency, solve a problem, or make everyday tasks easier or more enjoyable. So then it sort of raises the question, well, what are those dilemmas and problems that we are trying to grapple with as data protection leaders? And we've put a few that Sam and I have thought about up on the slide here. So one of the first issues that we think we're trying to grapple with and find a hack for is this idea of the demand versus impact paradox, right? As data protection leaders, we often find ourselves with being bombarded with requests that may not align with the strategic goals of the business. And often that can lead to the data protection teams being seen as a support function rather than strategic advisors. So one of the first hacks we want to talk about is how do you move yourself out of that space, right? How do you get from being a team that just deals with DSARs, that probably doesn't drive the business forward, into someone that's seen integral in the organizations that you work in? And then how do you move beyond being order takers, right? How do you stop being someone that's simply fulfilling requests and start to act proactively to identify opportunities to guide and develop the businesses that you're part of? And how do you develop a culture where data protection's integrated into the strategic planning of the business and not just a compliance tick box exercise? Another issue or problem that we're often trying to find hacks around is what I call the skills gap or the talent acquisition gap, the challenge that I know I face as a data protection leader, you do, Sam, which is to find people that have the skills, which are quite wide-ranging, to be in a data protection team. You know, things such as expertise in areas such as undertaking impact assessments and all that involved from a data protection perspective. But also, how do you find people that are skilled enough to speak with your technical teams or your software engineers when they're developing and deploying products or services? Or how do they grapple with AI and its use of data, or data governance just more generally? So, and you also see in this space that often we're dealing with insufficient budgets to be able to deliver this, and potentially not the sort of career paths that our junior members want, and we can't offer those. So how do we get around those? So we'll cover some of that. Other issues we've thought about are data as a strategic asset, right? So how do we move data protection into being something that isn't just a compliance activity? How can we show that we're innovating, we're helping the business be more competitive? And then also issues around being good communicators and collaborating with the wider business. How do we as data protection leaders ensure that we're engaging stakeholders on a cross-functional basis? And then finally, navigating regulatory change. What we're seeing increasingly is that the law changes rapidly and it increases the dimensions of issues that we're having to cover. You know, the privacy and AI debate that's going on, where should all of that be dealt with and looked after, right? These are all issues we're trying to grapple with as data protection leaders. So when you bring all of this together, what we're talking about is a demand overload that needs leaders in the team to be able to demonstrate strong leadership skills, strong communication skills, and strong technical ability. It's like the whole package, basically, that you have to be able to demonstrate. So some of the things we'll talk about that we do should help you deliver in these areas. So what we thought we'd talk about to start with is, what do Sam and I do when we drop into an organisation? How do we start to look for those places where we can find those gains, get that positive impact? And this list, look, I know I'm in a room full of really talented individuals, so anything we say today, right, you may already be doing, you may already know, but it's always useful to hear somebody else's point of view, and as we get to the end of this talk, we're going to ask the audience, you know, share your hints and tips. But when we land, you know, we start with a gap assessment. Okay, that's simple. We try and see how the organisation's doing against the legal requirements. But all that really tells us is a longer sort of list of activities that may or may not have been done. It doesn't start to give us an idea about how we prioritise risk. So One of the first things we do is we try to start to understand the organisation's special characteristics, which I could describe as like the unique operating features of the organisations that we're in. And they're considering things like the economic and public sector that the organisation works in, its geographic footprint, the processing activities or the services that it delivers, the overall business plan, its legal and organisational structure, its regulatory track record, how is it doing with regulators, how is it doing with data subjects, overall its culture and ethics, and its resources that it has available, and its risk appetite. Because all of those factors allow us to start not just looking at where the gaps are, but where we may need to prioritise activity. So if I've dropped into an organisation where I can see that the regulator's been looking at how they're approaching direct marketing, that's going to go straight to the top of my list of things to deal with. If I drop into an organisation that's got a large international footprint, I'm going to have to start to think about how to get people into the right jurisdictions, because I can't be an expert on everywhere. So those ideas, those unique operating features are absolutely key for taking your checklist of activities and starting to put some priority on them. But then you also start to think about, okay, who's going to be looking at us, right? Who are our adverse scrutineers that are going to be looking at the activities that we undertake? And that, again, can then help me start to decide where to prioritise activities. So if I know I've got a strong employee workforce with trade unions, I'm going to have to start to really look closely at how we're handling employee data. If I know, for example, that I've got a privacy activist that's taken an interest in the organisation that I'm working for, I'm going to have a look what's on their agenda, not just the issue that they're looking at us now with, but what they may be coming down the track with. And I start to plan and prioritise my activities around there. And then I also start to look at how I can engage the senior stakeholders within the organisation to draw them in to these activities. And that requires that I understand their business plan and motivation so I can align with them. And that might then unlock the door for me for further funding or further support that I may need as we go down the track. What I'm emphasising here is that this is how we decide to deploy potentially limited budgets on key activities that can get me the most bang for my buck. So Sam, I think I'll let you now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to add to that, obviously we come and have had experience in the Big Four. Mm-hmm. So what I'm not preaching or envisaging is that you do these full belts and whistles, 6-figure gap assessment. You don't have time for it. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think just when you come into the organization, you need to understand where are the skeletons in the closet. When I've gone into most of the organizations I've been, it's about getting the team in the room, rather than it sitting in everybody's brains as to what we're doing and where and why we've prioritized certain things. You need a mechanism to control that, track it, be able to explain it, and then wrap data around it to show to your management team. And that can be something very sophisticated with a tool that the team has or that you can purchase, or it's making the best of whatever tools you've got at your disposal already that the business are using. So we'll come on to that in a bit more detail, but just so you don't think we're going to be doing Big Four gap assessments all over the place.
No, and I think, Sam, one of the things we were talking about before the session was, like, we know some people in the room won't have the budgets that sometimes we get to deploy on the work we do as consultants and in the organisations we work for. But the important part of that risk prioritisation and not treating data protection as a box ticking exercise means that you can target the things that are most impactful, and you can actually say to the leadership team that you're working with, these are the things we're going to focus on. These are the resources you've given me. This is what we can actually do with those resources. So one of our first hacks is always around prioritisation and making sure we communicate very, very clearly to the leadership what is in the art of the possible based on the resources that we've been given.
Yeah. In a language that your business speaks, which we'll come on to in a bit more detail further on in the presentation. So our next slide is on around data protection structure, and this is where I'd like you to indulge me. So obviously there's no one size fits all. It depends on your organizational setup, your culture, where you're geographically located. Are you inheriting a team? Or do you have the luxury of building it from scratch? So there are different models. So I'm curious, just by way of show of hands, how many of you have a centralized data protection function? Okay, so quite a few. Not a majority, I would say. Decentralized, show of hands? Something else, hybrid? Or just not sure, need another coffee? So I think it's fair to say that there's a good mix. There's no one size fits all, like I said. But my team, and I think they love and hate me for this, is I always stress the importance of a strong fundamental operating structure. Doesn't matter if it's all controlled centrally, or it's decentralized, or it's hybrid, but what you do need is clarity on who is doing what, how do you operate with other teams, be it InfoSec, be it the DPO function, both of those sit under me, but how you operate with those, how you operate with public policy, legal, and so on. You need clear lines in the road. If you have that, and you know exactly what each team is expected to do and then when the inevitable happens, when you have churn in the team or people leave, as they will do these days, it's a different culture in which different time in which we're operating in. People will generally shift jobs quicker than they maybe have done in the past. This is making me feel a bit old. But if you're getting a 2-year return on investment on an employee, potentially a bit longer, 4 years, you're probably doing quite well. So what you need, and what I've found, is a really strong foundational core with processes, with ways of working. It does take time up front. It does take investment. But I can tell you from the teams that I've gone in and done this for, as a repeatable process, you get that right at the beginning, it pays off dividends down the road. Because then when the inevitable does happen and your resources do leave, you can simply plug and play those resources, and there's a clear operating model within which they need to play. Now, I'm not talking about some kind of fancy document that sets out, oh, these are our principles of our team, and we'll all play nicely, and da-da-da-da-da. What I mean is actually when a data breach comes in, God forbid, or a data subject right, or it's a regulatory inquiry, or whatever it may be, everyone is clear about the role that they play and the process that gets deployed. And ideally, you have automation. Doesn't need to be tech or an AI tool, but those are obviously coming increasingly online, and I do think there's ways in which we can embrace that as teams and leaders. But there's a clear way in which that process gets deployed, so there's no kind of scramble when things happen to be like, oh, are you doing this, or am I doing this, or where should this go, which team should it be picked up by? So it sounds very basic, but actually I'll be surprised the amount of conversations I have with my peers where this is the first conversation we have over a dinner or a coffee when I'm at conferences. And I think from the observations I've seen over the years, that core structural team foundation is fundamental to setting you up for success going down the road, whatever that structure may look like. Now, having said that, obviously it can still fail at the best of times, but I think it's what I'm increasingly seeing with the tech and automation that we've got coming in, that there's an opportunity that we put less reliance on the people and more on the process. So then that again reduces the admin layer of what would ordinarily be done by 2 or 3 people, can be replaced by a very streamlined process, therefore making your team more efficient in the long run. Any more thoughts, James?
I think when it comes to functional structure, and Sam's right, this still is the thing that I end up talking the most to clients about when we're looking at governance, is how should we set up our team? What should it look like? Should we have a DPO? Where should they be based? You know, should we have a head of data protection and so on? And when I first go into an organisation and they're still relatively immature, and I know the GDPR has been around many years now, and we've had data protection laws long before that. The structure is still something we end up looking at first, and often we will start with a centralised position. If I go back to my days many years ago, Barclays, that's exactly what we put in place. Start with, we had a really strong central group core, which we were then able to build out from and have strong teams in different business areas. So we moved from that centralised position. And what I've always done with organisations is we get the centralised team strong with good people working there. We try to bring in people from other business areas that can act as data protection champions or advocates for privacy. Try to get them trained up at the same time as we start to look to hire more dedicated professionals for data protection to start looking after their specific business function or geography. And Sam, I know you have done lots of work in terms of geographic spreads. I don't know if it's probably worth now just talking a little bit about how you've approached that, because you're in many jurisdictions, aren't you?
Yeah. So I probably should have said at the beginning, do we all know who Bolt is? I mean, Simon's in the room, so I usually say the European version of Uber, but I can't say that. But we're the European super mobility app, so we offer food delivery services, taxi hailing, that kind of thing. So we're headquartered in Estonia, mainly prevalent in Europe and Africa, and increasingly in the Middle East. So we have quite an interesting footprint. So particularly when I was looking for talent, I think what I would say as well is look to the non-obvious places. I think tends to be, if we're busy or whatever, we work with our recruitment teams and we look for just qualified lawyers. I think I spend a lot of time looking in places to do with the universities. We actually had some interns come through our system who we've trained up and skilled up into the role. Some technologists, people who aren't necessarily of a privacy background, but increasingly that will become more prevalent and valuable in the structure that I need for the future. And I think also just the geographical footprint. Now we have a gravity that takes us more towards Estonia. I have people down in Africa now as well, which then gives me the proximity to the regulators as well in terms of lead supervisory authorities and regulators in a region where we're increasingly trying to break the market. What I would also say as well, and obviously James won't like this, you don't always need to go to external counsel for support. I mean,
we've
yeah, okay. Well, like, obviously, I've now got a bigger team, but I've had to fight for those resources in that budget, and that's been through constant communication of the why in a language that the business understands. And so it's been a journey. So when there was just me in the trenches with the original 2 team members, it was like, okay, well, what are we going to do here? We had to think smart about where we're going to deploy resources from. So leveraging our customer support team, which I'm sure many of you have potentially done in respect of your DSARs, but then also looking at other teams within the business that can supplement your central organization, who have an understanding of core business operations, that when they go back into their functions, take the understanding of privacy with them and increase the awareness levels. So what we actually did recently is we had members of our operations team, which are in a fairly compliance-related role in the sense that they do our driver onboarding checks, they check documentation to make sure the drivers are who they say they are, hopefully, and then they onboard them onto the system. There's a nice sort of connection there, and we brought them into the team on an internal internship to give us some interim firepower whilst we could basically do this racy and stand up the processes we needed for the long-term team coming in. Now, it's not to say that you've all got operations teams and you can do that, but just planting the seed of look for a resource and look for support in non-obvious places. And often what I've found when I'm speaking to the management team, it's not generally a no when I ask them resources that are already internal. They don't want to add on the additional headcount to the budget, but if I'm able to repurpose and leverage a relationship with a business leader to borrow some resources for a little while, generally that's seen as a positive, and it doesn't increase the headcount across the board. So just to sort of think about how you structure your team, how you deploy the resources, how you get people in, if you can't get them from the market straight away.
Yeah. So if I was to summarise this, Sam, I think the hack here that we're talking about is we start with the minimal viable product, whether that's 1 team member or 2 team members. Then we look at how we can pull resources in from the surrounding business to start taking on some of those responsibilities as we build our business case to be able to hire people. And when we start to talk to the leadership teams about where we want to make hires or what they will focus on, we start to make sure we align it with the business culture, the legal risk appetite, and particularly geographic spread as well. And I think one of the things over the last few years I've become very, very, very open to is I will have team members anywhere in the world as long as they are good enough and we can service the jurisdiction that they're responsible for from their location as well. And when I look at the Data Protection Extend and Accelerate team, we now have team members across the UK, Poland, India and Spain, because at the moment that's giving us the best geographical coverage for our clients all around the world. But it's those sort of issues that we take on board to make sure we can build a good functional structure.
And I think next we're going to just look at how you can deploy the different layers of your existing team on certain tasks. So really thinking about with automation in mind and processes, where do you put your most senior layers of the team? James?
Yeah, so I look at this as a sort of pyramid, basically, where we've got the junior tasks or the junior team members at the bottom supporting our mid-level teams and then our senior people. And really the juniors for us and for our clients form the foundation that everything gets built on. So once we start to be able to hire in and put good juniors in place to undertake tasks that you can describe as process-driven, repeatable, that can be delivered under supervision, then we're starting to be able to free up the rest of our resources to focus on more important initiatives. So that the junior team members focus on executing well-defined, low-risk activities that follow templates, workflows or playbooks, and then they work to provide that foundation to support the seniors from there. Now, what we do in order to get the juniors ready for this, and again, it's something over the last few years I've become increasingly open to, is not to underestimate what they're capable of. Data protection, cybersecurity, AI, it is hard, right? I'm not taking anything away from the work that anyone does in this room, but there's a lot of it that isn't hard, right? And there's a lot that can be turned into repeatable processes. And we'll show you on the next slide some of them, but just one example is first passers at DSARs. They take an inordinate amount of time. They pull in a lot of good resource to deal with them. The more of that you can shove down into a junior level, but still get a good output from it, the more time you're going to free up for your team, right? So we look to be able to build teams that have a really strong foundation, and we get there by giving them the tools, the playbooks, the guides that can deliver on that. We also ensure that proper training is in place for them. So all of our team members get sent out straight away to do the IAPP CIPE, right? You can have your own views on whether that's good, bad, you're indifferent to it. But what it means is, as leaders, I don't need to spend all of my time getting a foundation level of knowledge into those individuals. So we get them out very quickly. We take them out of the business, actually, for a good 4-6 weeks to get them through that process. That means when they return to us, they've got a good foundation, and then we start to layer on top of that, right? We start to get them doing shadowing of other juniors that are already been through the process and then delivering for clients. We also run clinics and workshops for them where they can come to us while they're doing their revision or afterwards, where we continually put them through new tasks and exercises. So that's the law firm model, but I think it does work as well in a private client setting as well, to ensure you've got that training in place, Sam.
And what I would say is this model doesn't necessarily just lend itself to a large team. So when it was me with just 2 when I first joined Bolt, and we were drowning in DSARs, and we actually had law enforcement requests which sat under our team at that time as well. When I came in, it was very much about looking at, okay, well, what are the repeatable processes that are large volume, low impact, that we need to basically get off their desks first so we can free up their time to move the program forward in a strategic way. So we deployed this kind of mechanism, and then that's where we brought in those internal interns and different people to bolster us whilst we were able to build up the capability at the more senior layers of the team. So it's really about challenging yourself to think about, okay, I could do it, or I'd prefer to have somebody do it in the team, but actually where can this be driven with the process first, and then the people added on as the kind of the value add stage of the process and adding the most impact.
Yeah, and look, the reason we built this model was because a lot of clients were coming to us saying, I need a solicitor on secondment, and I didn't have any solicitors sent to them, right? What I had was people that were going through apprentice schemes at DWF to train to be solicitors, and I had paralegals there. So we turn to the client and go, what is it you want them to do? And they say, we're swamped with work. And we go, well, what is it? What can we carve out for you that we could get into a junior team, and we'll back them, so we'll make sure they don't cause any problems. And that model's worked really, really well. And a lot of the clients that now take in, it's very, very large organisations are starting to go through that process we went through, which was to understand you can get more into junior people if you put the right guardrails around them. And if I give you an example, do you mind if I talk about the law enforcement stuff? Fine. Is that okay? Yeah. So one of the things we did with Sam was that you get a lot of law enforcement requests from around the world for access to data. And on the face of it, that sounds like the most complex task to work through for an organisation, but actually it's quite process driven, is repeatable. So you guys built the playbook, we delivered up the people to be able to work from that. But that's the bit about challenging yourself about what may or may not be difficult to deal with. So that's why you'll see on these slides, I'm saying, right, you don't need to pay for senior level support. Think about what you're asking for. And you don't always need qualified lawyers to do this work. There's very good, bright people out there. And also, as we've already mentioned, source internationally as well. As I've said, my team's now predominantly based in Poland and India, where we deliver from. And they are amazing lawyers. Poland, for example, has excellent universities delivering really high quality individuals, perfect English, but they don't have access to the type of work that as UK professionals we can deliver to them. So they're really, really keen to work in this environment.
And I think if I could just add as well, I think we eventually moved away from that model, much to James's dismay. So the model had always been, when I was talking to my management team, is that this is a hump. Here's the data that shows you this is low impact, low value work that doesn't need to be staffed in this way. And we basically over time moved that out and moved it in and moved it to other members of the business. But I think, and this will probably come on to our next point, I needed the data and the impact of that and the dashboarding around this to show the management team in a language that they understand what was the ROI and the impact, or perhaps not the ROI of these tasks that the majority of the team was focusing on, to be able to unlock the budget and the additional headcount to move us to supporting the business on the topics they did want us to support on. So it became very, very important to show them through metrics and data the true impact of where our time was being spent and where it actually should be spent better to achieve what they needed to achieve as a business.